Yeah, I think this Kirsten guy, or Keston, whatever his name is, he gets so mad when I came to the Discord. He's like, I have to ban him quick. He's manipulating. I mean, the thing about people like him and Joe Springer and others is that they're not established biopharma people. And it's a kind of a ruse to be like, I want to establish myself as a biopharma person the first time with this. And it's like, bro, you understand how, like, on its face, how ridiculous that is. This is your first ever big, bold binary event prediction, and you want everyone to take you really dead seriously? Yeah, I mean, I feel bad for him because obviously he's not experienced in this field and he's just sort of gambling and reverse engineering causality and self-assurance. But wait, Anthony, wait. You're telling me he was long Cassava? Don't tell me that. Whoa. You're telling me he was long Cassava? Stop. Bro is long Cassava? And he thinks he has good judgment? What's his explanation for that one? How, Sway? Is there evidence of this, Anthony? I mean, that's a huge data point for shorting INMB. The lead cheerleader was long Cassava. This is like better than Joe Springer. I mean, wouldn't that make you want to quit the stock market or like stop trying to predict? That's a huge data point. I didn't know this. He deleted his Seeking Alpha article, but the Wayback Machine might preserve it, right? Takeovers don't happen too often in biotech, and I wouldn't be in any stock praying for a takeover. That's just not good investing.
It all started with Cassava Sciences. That was actually the first company to report stabilization or improvement of cognition in Alzheimer's patients. But it wasn't the only one. A bit later, September 2021, a really good data from INmune Bio's phase 1 trial came out. And if you look at the corporate presentation, even though they actually haven't communicated cognition data yet from the phase 1 trial, you see that they are probably doing the same thing as Cassava had reported that same year. Then 2022, I tried to be omnipresent, so to speak. So I have quite a big investor network around me.
Omnipresent? Investor network? Homie, you couldn't find Wall Street with Google Maps.
Well, the biomarker part of the report for me is really essential. As the CEO of Cassava Sciences once stated, biomarkers don't lie. And so the companies I'm looking at mostly have drugs with two mechanisms of action. Why is that interesting? Because Alzheimer's is a multifactorial disease. There's basically a whole lot going on in each patient, but it's not
two mechanisms
necessarily the same. So if you want combination therapies are going to be necessary at a given. We already see what anti-amyloid antibodies are doing. Once the amyloid is gone, because that's what they do, you can slow down cognition by 35%, but probably not more.
He did say it was going to be one of these four. So it has to protocol errors, yes. Oh, I hate that. I hate that when I get those protocol errors. Well, it had positive trends. Unfortunately, the primary endpoint, what does that say? Missed statistical significance. I mean, this looks like good data. What is this? Are they really giving a p-value versus baseline? I mean, look, they got a point here. It's pretty good. They almost got it. Biomarkers don't lie, man. Okay, so strike 1 on Bivy, strike 2 on Cassava. Who is 𝗘𝗺𝗘𝗅? Who's 𝗘𝗺𝗃? Did 𝗘𝗺𝗃 work? Okay, so how'd 𝗘𝗺𝗃 go? Did 𝗘𝗺𝗃 do cure Alzheimer's? Yeah, it's a little gremlin cat. IL-2. Oh, I used to short this stock. No way they're giving IL-2 for Alzheimer's. Holy moly. 38 people. 8S cog. That's a big separation. Maybe 𝗘𝗺𝗃 is going to make it. IL-2 is, it's pretty poisonous, but pretty big decline there in placebo. I mean, almost hit stat sig too. I'm omnipresent at the moment. Be omnipresent. Yeah, V, it's been a rough little ride for me, but that's just the last 6 months. I don't know if you missed my Q4, it was pretty good. I got a couple of trades right, Q4. Not even Q4, it was mostly like December. So it's only been 6 months. Okay, so he's 0 for 3, 91 million market cap. Doesn't sound like a company on the precipice of curing Alzheimer's, but maybe next year. Yeah, he's definitely spoken like a guy who just is learning about the sector. But there's a Dunning-Kruger effect there. ATTK, you think that when drug stocks go up when their drugs stop working or don't work? Is that what you're thinking? IMNB is any day now, basically. But let's go back to PubMed. It's not a decision, it's data. My decision is I'm short, but I can still keep working on it and, of course, change my mind. All right, so let's try this. Let's try Alzheimer. I think I did this. Alzheimer TNF. Let me see if I have a file here. I might. It seems like you're a very, very big bag holder in INMB. But you can learn how to invest by watching. I mean, the way I go about things are I try to arrive at a fair value for a company. So it sounds like you're what I call narrative investor, which is not what you want to be. The narrative investor doesn't think about price. He just thinks about the quote unquote story. Price is very important when you buy things. In the stock market, prices can determine whether you make money or lose money. So you want to focus on price a lot. But narrative investors, typically amateur investors, retail investors, they focus on the story of the company, which they call fundamentals, but it's really just a story 99% of the time. And they don't, ever, think about, what should I pay for this? If you analyze the value of a drug company, you should be able to come up with, roughly what is this company worth? What would Carlyle or Berkshire pay to buy the whole company? And that's a really good exercise. It's kind of called private equity investing. And you can do this with biotech and speculative companies too. One has to sort of get a sense for price. That's the most important thing to me. TNF Alzheimer's. TNF identified in the MS brain in Alzheimer's, 1991. Is it good or bad though? Yeah, management confidence is something that does really hurt a stock because most stocks, institutions are the main holder. Retail is not a factor in real companies like Sarepta, but retail is only a factor in stuff like, quantum computing, INMB, Cassava. Like most of the time retail is not, that relevant. But in this case, if there's no institutions left to buy the stock, retail takes over and they need to invent reasons to buy stock. And most of the time retail just wants the 100x. They want the moonshot. They want something that will give them financial independence. But of course, there's no such stock. Adalimumab is the other one. IPO oversubscription doesn't really mean anything because it just, once something's oversubscribed, it just goes crazy oversubscribed because everyone wants a piece of it. Okay, so these are some of the early papers on brain immunity and things like that. Yeah, there was this, back then in the 90s, there was this, late 90s even, there was an idea that, maybe you can get indomethacin or some other anti-inflammatory drugs to work for Alzheimer's, and over again it was not worked. This could be the one time, we'll see. A lot of papers. Inhibition of NF-kappa B potentiates amyloid beta mediated apoptosis. See, it's funny because it's really not clear whether you want or don't want apoptosis in Alzheimer's brain. It may, quite frankly, just be a net neutral. No, I have a lot of lungs I like. Akira the hero, Regeneron. I think the drug may enter the brain in sufficient amounts. It's hard to tell. But I think if you're going to short it, you're going to need to feel comfortable that it's just a flawed design. Neuroprotection and toxicity in by TNF. Yeah, I think this drug will actually make things worse. Oh, wait, somebody's typing. Anthony. I'm not convinced it gets in at all. I got the sauce. You want to talk? You want to chat? I don't know how you unconvince a quantum bull. Maybe get them to watch my Shy interview. Give them a book on quantum computing and complexity and tell them to come back when they're done. Okay, samurai, let's go. Big bull on samurai. Big bull samurai. No reason to think. I'm trying to get the thesis right, independent of that. But yeah, unless you can show an assay that discriminates, then you assume it does not discriminate. Yeah, Circle is insane. We bought it at the IPO just because it was so hot and it was just, the momentum was undeniable. But now, I mean, this price is very, very hard to justify. And in the private markets, Circle was trading down. I mean, you could have bought Circle for $20, $30. It wasn't the hottest thing. It wasn't OpenAI. So it's a little bit of a bizarre thing. Yeah, Luke, he's batted 0 for 3 so far in Alzheimer's, and this is going to be sadly 0 for 4. I assume he'll give up after this. Biopharm is not for the faint of heart. He'll join Joe Springer. We have 𝗘𝗏𝗃, Joe Springer, who are all the other people in heaven that we miss? Circle is the next tether. Tether's the next circle. Matt Nakchab's out there, yeah. Oh man, he said he was sure that one of the 4 would work. And the first 3 didn't work, so this one he's sure about. You don't understand, when he says he's sure, he thinks he's sure. Circle price did not collapse. Circle price has gotten quadrupled. Yeah, Tether's not that shady. We got stuff a lot better than a sentiment scraper coming. Just bear with us. There's a lot of papers linking TNF and Alzheimer's, I gotta say. No, but you don't understand the TNF receptor 2. You need to spare that receptor because it's going to fix everything in Alzheimer's. You understand? I know medicine. Yes, this is my first time. Yes, the last 3 things I said were wrong. Yeah, it should be the other way around. Where are the bulls for this stock? Does anybody? Where are the bulls? Is there anyone who wants to do a call? I went to the Anders site. He's also in Annovis. Pupil? I know my pupils. They work for me. I paid them millions of dollars. Everybody gangsta until the number comes up that nobody wants to call. I think it's just the same old thing. Like, this is the first... Well, actually, the Anders research guy is trying to do more binaries, but for crying out loud, he's really confused, I think.
So, do you think the markets are going to go up?
I don't know if the market's going to go up or not.
Maybe if we pray together, we can make it go up.
As certain that INDB won't reach its endpoint as you were about Cassava?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they're very different animals. I could see myself getting to that point at some point, but I have done a lot less homework on INMB than Cassava. These things do take time, but you know, it certainly seems like it's not going to work. I mean, it's a long shot at the very least. It's fairly clear to me that, you know, this isn't a drug that's going to help, especially in a 24-week time frame. Very small trial. It's certainly not going to hit its primary endpoint, no matter what. The question is, can they eke out a result that's respectable enough to continue to phase 3 or a bigger phase 2? I think if it's directionally in the wrong direction, I think that they wouldn't bother. And they do sort of have to release that, I think, that if they don't show the primary endpoints top-line data, like if they try to show a subgroup or something, they really do have to say, this is the exact data. So if the exact data is even-steven with placebo, but a subgroup is better, you know, that's something that, you know, conceivably they can kind of go forward with. I don't think their investors would be too happy. You know, some of these people could consider that a win. You know, the classic subgroup fallacy that happens every time. Primary endpoint is worse than placebo. I don't think there's anything that could save them.
Yeah, I think there's no discussion. If the primary endpoint is worse than placebo, then there usually isn't any point in continuing the study. But could you maybe, if you don't mind, maybe summarize in 2 to 3 points what makes you think that they won't reach the primary endpoint?
I think you have to look at the disease and look at what's been tried and see if there are any commonalities with TNF. So TNF is a well-interrogated, well-studied mechanism of action. The entire immune landscape has been prodded and poked for potential, you know, druggability. Prednisone, of course, and other steroids are the mainstay of all autoimmune and inflammatory disease. They're the first line of defense for almost every disease. These drugs work in all these diseases. It's remarkable. If you ever look at a label for steroids, there's over 50 different diseases that steroids work for. You know, it's basically the entire collection of autoimmune and autoinflammatory or inflammatory diseases. The reason we have lots of great drugs like Humira and Cosentyx and, you know, Stelara and all these other kind of like more rifle shot approaches is that, you know, the steroid is a shotgun. Whereas these other drugs are more sniper rifles or AK-47s. And in many ways, for most diseases, they're better actually than using the shotgun. Nevertheless, you know, they both work. And a study was done of steroids and Alzheimer's, and it not only didn't work, but it showed that steroids seem to make things worse. And
steroids reduce TNF alpha dramatically. So this drug also reduces TNF alpha dramatically. That's the proposal of how it works. So steroids, in essence, induce this drug naturally. And that's why blocking TNF alpha in rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease works. Well, also steroids work because they block TNF alpha downstream. They do a whole bunch of other things too. But in essence, you subsume within steroids the mechanism of action of TNF alpha. And that can come with pros and cons. But you are subsuming it within. And so the idea that if steroids haven't worked for Alzheimer's, how could TNF alpha inhibition work for Alzheimer's? The bulls state that there's a flaw in this thesis, but I think that, there's grasping at straws and there's being like kind of practical. You can, PubMed, there's 40 million articles. You can find what you're looking for if you want to. You can find every crazy theory in the world. Alzheimer's is a infectious disease. You can find, thousands and thousands of little, findings. But, you have to be practical. And if TNF alpha, if there was a small TNF alpha trial as well in Alzheimer's that didn't work. So if it were to work, there should be a signal there, and it did not work. Prednisone makes things worse. It seems clear to me that this drug won't work. The mechanism of action is a little spurious, a little dubious as well, because if you think about what's going on in the Alzheimer's brain, you probably do need TNFR1. So TNFR1 is the main binding site for TNF alpha. And TNFR1 causes apoptosis and necropsis, or basically cells to die. Necropsis, apoptosis, and
nerve cells to die in particular, right?
Other cell deaths. Sorry.
Nerve cells to die in particular, right?
No, not in particular. Just any cell, really. Any cellular debris gets cleaned up, and partially through apoptosis. Yeah, necroptosis, I think, is the other one. And this is an important thing. Like, you can't just stop this, I think. In certain diseases where there's like excess production and it's chronic, perhaps stopping it is a good idea. But TNF also helps. We have evolved it for a reason. Just knocking it out isn't, necessarily 100% has to be good. So I think that there's something there that's important to consider. Is it necrosis? So I also wanted to point out a few more things. One, Alzheimer's is a tough space to work with regardless. It's not clear that we know what's going on in this disease at all. And, TNF is just as good as a random guess as anything else. But random guesses are, yeah.
Might interrupt you there? Just a quick question. From what I recall from the last time I've looked into Alzheimer's, and admittedly, if it's been a while, there was some consensus about that actually the point when we start seeing symptoms, it might be too late to treat the disease. Could you maybe refresh me on if there have been any advances on that consensus or findings to maybe discard it?
Yeah, certainly the consensus is you want to treat as early as possible, but it is a preclinical disease. So disease starts without any symptoms. So that makes it really hard to treat. And clinical trials are not meant to be 15, 20-year trials. So that also makes it difficult to do a trial. Intervening for 24 weeks, I think, is a really short time frame. They probably couldn't do more due to funding reasons. But there's also not a great evidence in phase 1 that this drug does anything. And I can go through that data, but the phase 1 data is not good. It sort of shows that they don't have a dose response. They don't have a good sense of what the drug's doing. It's not clear if there were any cognition changes in phase 1 or to what extent those were legitimate, or we have the whole picture of them. So it's sort of an old mechanism that is trying to be resurrected for this disease that we don't know very well. I have a few more data points that are important, but I want to make sure I have them sort of all in order. Yeah, so the likelihood of seeing statistical significance is very low. I will say in the phase 1, their highest dose cohort only reduced cytokine levels by 15%, which is not very much. Prednisone reduces these things by like 80% each. So it's really unlikely that this drug is doing anything biologically that's interesting. A few more interesting pieces, that MS, which is kind of the closest to Alzheimer's, MS actually, TNF alpha inhibitors actually hurt you. So it's sort of this interesting data point that, you know, steroids do help you in MS, by the way. That in these certain types of diseases, you may not want TNF inhibition, which I've sort of talked about before. Again, a lack of success in any Alzheimer's trial. Let me just finish.
Yeah, sure.
And then, yeah, I mean, again, you know, if you look at a big map of immunology, there's no really great sort of reason to target one molecule versus the other. You know, every attempt in neuroinflammation and autoimmunity for Alzheimer's has failed. Doesn't mean this one will fail because of that, but it certainly doesn't augur well. There's no institutional investors for this company, which is eerie. You know, there's almost always somebody that believes in a stock, but it's a very suspicious kind of like absence of any healthcare dedicated investors. Usually somebody will take a shot on a high upside just in case, but there's literally nobody. It's all retail. What else do I have? Oh, well, it's a very large molecule, so it seems unlikely to cross the blood-brain barrier. There's some back and forth on this. It's not clear that they did an assay that was well done. It seems like they maybe used a test that would pick up native TNF, not just their TNF, but also possibly pick up just the TNF that exists already in patients. So I feel like, you know, we don't have all the answers on PK, at least, but I think the biggest problem is that just blocking TNF alpha doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. I think it's actually more likely that the drug hurts you than helps you. I do think there's this common impression that if you do a clinical trial that, you know, there's a chance it will come out good, you know, and that's sort of like you know, it's really, you know, you do have to look at the governing dynamics of the situation, the first principles. You know, you could argue there's a chance when I hit a billiard ball that it'll accelerate to the speed of light and leave our solar system, but that chance is very low. And I feel like, you know, when there's a clinical trial, people get excited, they think maybe I can make a lot of money, and then the clinical trial results come out, they're not very good, and all of a sudden, you know, there's a lot of tears. But, you know, I feel like we'll know in a few days, you know, which is the nice thing here.
Could you maybe just walk me through the thinking of the correlation to MS and why the inhibitor would actually be harmful to Alzheimer's as well as it evidently to MS?
Yeah, so they're both brain autoinflammatory diseases. So, you know, if you give TNF alpha inhibitors to MS, it seems to worsen it. If you give steroids to Alzheimer's, it seems to worsen it. When you give steroids to MS patients, it does help quite a bit. In fact, to the point where they are the first line therapy for steroids for MS. And I think that, you know, the fact that TNF inhibitors hurt in the one kind of like autoimmune inflammatory brain disease is like very concerning, because they've actually talked in the past about treating MS with TNF alpha inhibitors, and it's pretty clear that would be a terrible idea. And in fact, I think that's what's kept pharma, who has no shortage of ambition and no shortage of risk tolerance. Pharma would have been very excited to potentially do, for example, Humira in Alzheimer's, or Enbrel in Alzheimer's. You know, it's a very big market. It would have doubled the size of their revenue, but none of those big companies decided it was a good idea. I think partially for this reason. There was also not really a lot of evidence that there would be a way to see a clinical benefit in the trial. Again, vis-a-vis timing and, you know, how fast does this disease change? Can you really arrest the disease this quickly? But again, if anybody was going to take a shot, it would have been kind of one of these. It certainly would have been one of the big pharmas that wanted to give it a shot.